Okay, and so today we are super happy to welcome Siwan Boufaden, who is doing his PhD thesis under the supervision of François Xavier and Thomas Galouette, so in Marne-la-Vallée, who is going to talk about doing matching measures with kernels.
Okay, so hello, thank you for the invitation. I hope you all had great holidays. So today we'll talk about a few topics about measure matching with kernels. So the outline of this talk is first to present our article with François Xavier, which is quite theoretical and is about mainly the Coulomb discrepancy, which I will define later. And then I will talk about a few more applied subjects, which are still a work in progress, where we use the energy distance kernel to do large deformation matching, so more in a shape, more shape analysis. So first, what are the motivation? So there are many subjects in data science that are modeled through measures. So let it be in image processing, language processing, or whatever. So it's important to be able to compare this measure with functionals that are easy to compute, to estimate, and that are still relevant. So the two main tools that we use is first the optimal transport. So I have just a small definition here. It will not be really important. So just what you need to know is in optimal transport, you want to transport your measure mu on nu. And this cost of transport is modeled through the cost function C. If at C you take the square Euclidean distance, for example, you end up with the Wasserstein 2 space. Okay? And another family of distances are given by maximum mean discrepancy distances. So what you do is you take a kernel. So the two main examples that we will cover are the energy distance kernel, which is minus the Euclidean distance, or the Coulomb kernel, which in RD is expressed this way. So 1 over x to the power d minus 2. To compare your two measures, what you do is you take the double integral of g against the measure mu minus nu, okay? And I choose to present it this way because this quantity here, we call it the potential generated by your measure. And it's a function of space. And for example, if you take the Coulomb kernel in dimension 3, what you end up with is the electric interaction, for example, for positively charged or negatively charged gases, this kind of thing. In our application, what we often have a target. So one of the measures is static, okay? It will be your data, for example. And so we define this functional here, which is the square distance to nu, okay? So our goal is to make the two measures match. So we want to build parameterized transport, okay, which we get from a velocity field. These velocity fields correspond to the minimization of your distance. If you want to make mu match nu, well, it's a nice idea to minimize the distance to nu, just this. So this is what we see on this figure here. So your static measure will be your green dots. You can see it as a negatively charged dots, okay? Negatively charged measure that is static. And you pick your red dots here. And by minimizing the distance, you want to make them match, okay? Here we just have a gradient descent algorithm of the particles. And what we tried to do was to find condition on mu and nu to be able to compute to the global convergence of the flow of the functional E nu towards new.
Tu vois, tu peux cliquer sur le OK comme ça.
Okay. So first we start with a nice application which is quite visual. So why could it be useful to model this flow? So here is a generative flow application from 2024 by Ertrich and others. So what you do is you have your data, which is your images, which is a distribution in R to the power the number of pixels. Okay. You simulate your flow. That is, you pick, for example, a Gaussian samples from a Gaussian distribution in your high-dimensional space. You make them match to your data. Okay. This will give you a flow. Okay, so a continuum of images which you can learn through a neural network, for example. Here we deal with UNets, so with images, so UNets are quite good. And to generate new image, you just infer your neural network. So you pick another sample from your Gaussian distribution, and you end up with this kind of thing, which works. But it's not from me, so okay. So in application, data is always modeled as sum of Dirac measures. Okay. So here we present the particle flow. This is just you build your functional here, which is the exact functional that we defined previously on the Dirac measures. Okay. And what you do is you follow the gradient flow trajectories corresponding to the minimization of your energy. Okay. To be able to study this kind of equation using the Wasserstein geometry, so we take the mean field limit of these things, okay, and you end up with this continuity equation on your measure. So I won't detail much, but this just means that the mass of mu t is transported along the velocity fields vt, which are exactly minus a gradient here. So here is the gradient of the first variation in Wasserstein formalism, but it's not useful here. Another way to build a gradient flow in a Wasserstein space is to define what we call a GKO scheme. So here is really to understand as an implicit gradient descent. If you take, instead of W2, the Euclidean distance, you end up exactly with the implicit gradient descent algorithm. Okay. So what is the state of the art for this kind of flow? So very few results, okay, except in dimension 1. So in dimension 1, there is a convexity that we can leverage to conclude to the global convergence of the flow. Okay, so in higher dimensions, there is no convexity at all that we can use. Okay, and there are two directions of study. In dimension 1, the Coulomb kernel is exactly the energy distance kernel. Because the Coulomb kernel is defined, we will see it later, as an inverse of the Laplacian operator, which in dimension 1 correspond to the energy distance. So there are two directions we can explore. The first one is to study the Coulomb kernel, and the second one is to study the energy distance kernel in higher dimensions. Okay, so we have results on these two directions. So the big article which I will present now deals with the Coulomb kernel. It is quite theoretical in what we managed to do. And the end of the talk will be about the energy distance kernel with more applied results.
So what happened with the Coulomb kernel in dimension?
So in dimension 2, it's equal to the log of the Euclidean distance. Yeah, this formula is not working for dimension 2,
Yeah,
but it has a specific form which is log of.
It's good for d strictly bigger than 2.
Yeah, it's good for d strictly bigger than 2. Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes, but actually in our proof we do not use the explicit form of the Coulomb kernel. we use more its definition as an inverse of the Laplacian operator. Yes?
So in dimension 1, the MMD is geodesically convex.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So on the point is that there is problem when you evaluate on XX.
Yes, there is a problem. This kernel is singular, indeed. So you can't really work with Dirac measures on this kernel. That's why it's quite hard to simulate a flow about the Coulomb kernel. And the energy distance kernel is a lot more suited for applications, which we will see later. For now, every image you see is obtained with the energy distance kernel, okay? Not the Coulomb kernel. However, the Coulomb kernel is relevant because of its applications in physics, as I said, because it models the interaction of charged electrical particles. So now we'll present a few results from our article with François Xavier. So on the global convergence of Wasserstein gradient flow of the Coulomb discrepancy. First, what we study is the specific PDE. Okay, so we still have the same continuity equation as we had before. The potential phi is defined as a Laplacian of phi equals mu minus nu. It corresponds to the electrical field, scalar potential generated by the measure mu minus nu. Okay, and it has an explicit form which can be expressed through the Coulomb kernel here. Here CD is constant depending only on the dimension. Okay, you see that phi is, if you take the gradient of phi, you exactly get the velocity fields driving the mass that we talked about before. So this article is in acceptation phase at Siam Mathematical Analysis, and we just sent the. So the final version is available on arXiv, and soon the final version will be available too. Okay. So how do we deal with this? Coming from optimization background, more than PDE, is the Polyak-Lozajevich condition. Okay, it corresponds to be able to control the growth of your function by the growth of its squared gradient. Okay, and it provides, under a few regularity results, exponential convergence to the global minimum. So this functional inequality is quite strong, okay? In many dynamical systems, it cannot be the functional equality cannot be proven on your functional, okay? So, but what is enough to conclude to global convergence is if instead here you take, instead of for all x, you take xt, which is a curve in the Euclidean space. So this is what we do for measures. Here we have a PL inequality that depends upon a measure curve, okay? And here, post me on this or read the article, but this quantity is the exact analog to this one in Wasserstein spaces, okay? And this inequality allows to prove exponential convergence rate to the global minimum. Okay, this kind of PL inequality can be found in on measures under they are called, for example, for the entropy. This is some of the Log-Sobolev inequality, which allow to conclude to a convergence of the entropy functional. And in this community, they are more known as entropy production inequalities. Okay, so first, in order to conclude to the convergence of our curve, we have to prove that it exists. So the first part of the article is about the well-posedness of this equation system. So what we do, the proof is based on ideas from fluid mechanics, where we follow a particle flow. Okay, we manage to prove its existence in a Banach space, which controls the Holder norm and the norm of the derivative, first derivative. And we managed to prove that if you start with Holder continuous densities, so probability measured with Holder continuous densities, and then your target is also Holder continuous, then an Holder continuous curve exists at all time. Okay, there is no blow up. Okay, so this is for the well-posedness. The main trick to prove well-posedness was to control this function here. Instead of controlling your density mu t, what you control is mu t of psi t, where psi t is your flow. Okay, and actually this quantity here, ft, obeys a differential equation, which is quite simple and gives good control. Indeed, it's not unlike a logistic equation. Here, if you take a constant, you have a logistic equation. But anyway, we managed to prove the bound on the density of our measure curve. So it is bounded from above by the maximum of the initial density and from below by the minimums of the initial density. Okay? So this bound is useful to prove well-posedness. But it is actually this bound here, which is used to prove convergence of our flow. Okay. However, the main problem is, of course, you cannot have a probability measure in a non-compact setting that has a minimum density value strictly above 0. Okay. So our theorem only applies on in compact settings. Okay. We managed to prove well-posedness on manifolds, on Riemannian manifolds, okay, and on closed manifolds. So if we, so our hypothesis is to take measures that are Holder continuous initially, okay, with densities bounded away from 0, so you have move everywhere, and we managed to prove using our Polyak-Lozachevich inequality exponential convergence of the objective functional and of the Wasserstein distance. Okay, so this is our big convergence result. In the rest of the paper, so because there is no convexity that we can leverage, and no real regularity results that we can prove for general initial data, we used a different approach. So we use a different approach. So when you try to minimize a function, okay, you build a curve, and what you don't want is for this curve to stay in a local minima, okay, to stay stuck. So what we managed to prove was that our Coulomb discrepancy here does not have local minima that are non-global. The proof is we use flow interchange techniques. So that's a big name, but it just says that you can follow what happens when you take the flow of a particular function and of a functional A, and it gives you information about some control for functional B. So here, what we did was take a heat diffusion, okay, which corresponds to a minimization of the entropy, okay. We applied this heat diffusion to some part of mu, okay, and managed to prove that we get a curve that actually decreases our discrepancy.
Just one. So in your previous slide, what was the lambda? So because it means of mu zero underline.
Yeah, okay. So this lambda is this lambda here. Yeah, it's not.
Okay.
It's the minimum of the density that we get. Yeah, our theorem only applies on a compact setting for now. And our PL inequality, which I didn't develop here, is a PL equality with this parameter here.
So what does it mean? Mean nu, for example?
Yes, so you take a mu0 to be a probability measure with a density, okay? And this is the minimum of the density.
Value. So you
Sorry?
is the minimum the density value.
Yes, the
Okay.
density value.
So you're happy when you have something which is spread everywhere, or when it's
Yes, our theorem applies when we have mass everywhere.
Okay, so
Yes.
you need mass everywhere.
Yes, mass everywhere, but even a little bit of mass everywhere.
And you need something non too spiky because you upper bound is.
Yes, actually, this control here is obtained through regularity results. This control here also. We have to obtain some regularity results about the density muted. So in our proof, we managed to prove well-posedness in older spaces. But if you assume, for example, existence of C1 densities to this equation, you get the same kinds of control. There are several proofs with different hypotheses.
Basically, you have proved something when there is mass everywhere, and you don't want to be able to make mass disappear from. So if you're
Yes,
on
actually,
your target source, so you don't want hole, so you want mass everywhere. So,
yeah. For now, we want mass everywhere.
okay.
Yes.
So it's.
Yeah, it's a bit constraining, but well, I think it's quite a hard hypothesis to circumvent. Many papers stay for this kind of consideration in compact settings and with mass everywhere.
Yeah, but compact setting could be like okay, something.
Yes, however, we can stay in a non-compact setting with Holder continuous density because you know it will not be a finite measure, okay, and at some point the measure will be close to zero, okay. So you can have this bound here. Lambda would be zero, okay. So yes, that's what we managed to prove. So here we managed to prove, so for a very general measure this time, and in non-compact setting, that there is a no local, non-global minima. Okay? So another approach to tackle this optimization problems is to deal with critical points. So critical points in Wasserstein space, what are they? They can be defined through the GKO scheme. So critical points are just the point where your implicit gradient descent algorithm gets stuck. Okay, that's just what it means. So mu is in the admin of okay, so you stay at mu. Another way to see it is so in your continuity equation you had a velocity field Vt, okay, and we can define so what we call the Lagrangian or displacement critical points as points where you cannot decrease your functional just by velocity fields, okay? What you have to do is actually split the measure, which is illustrated here. So here is an artificial example where the symmetry gives you a point, gives you a configuration where the gradient algorithm is stuck. Okay, so points have no reason to decide to go up or down, so they are stuck, and that's what you see in the simulations. However, if you so this is a displacement critical points. However, it's not true Wasserstein critical points, because as you can see, we split the mass, we have a diffusion, and we end up with a convergence in a really non-trivial way. Okay. So here is a simulation with the energy distance.
What is the two cross?
So here your green dots are your target.
Okay, but at the end.
Yeah, at the end it's just that the last of the last cross. So here we took samples of this, okay, and the convergence is quite slow for the last point.
Okay, so you take sample of your density at each time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we managed to prove a small characterization of our critical points. So the first result, so about Lagrangian critical points, we were able to prove, so both actually for the Coulomb kernel and the energy distance kernel, that if a point is a Lagrangian critical point, so you can see it as, what I explained, you can't decrease your function just by moving your mass, you have to split it. Well, actually, if mu is such a point, mu coincides with mu in the interior of its support. So why did we have to take the interior? For this, we use the harmonic analysis method, where in order to take your Laplacian, you have to work on open sets. Okay? But this still tell you that if mu is a Lagrangian critical point, then the part where it is not equal to nu is of empty interior. Okay? Another characterization that we managed to get was that when we built our curve using the heat equation, we obtain a decreasing
empty interior because you take a density with respect to the Lebesgue measure.
No, here I take only a mu general measure and nu also. But what we do is actually take the Laplacian several times of our velocity field, and we manage to get, as the Laplacian interacts in a very specific way with the Coulomb kernel and the energy distance kernel, we manage to prove that in the interior, so where we are able to take the Laplacian, so only in the interior of the support, well, mu is equal to nu, here, okay? So this set may be empty, okay? Okay, so critical point is singular, that's the point of this. And if a measure is too singular, then it is not a critical point. Too singular, what this means, so we use the characterization using the Minkowski dimension. So I won't dwell into the details, but Minkowski dimension is just a way to define dimensions of fractals, this kind of thing, where you look at the growth of the measure of balls, okay? And you get a dimension. So if its Minkowski dimension is strictly less than the ambient dimension, then mu is not a critical point, okay? However, the two characterizations do not match. We still have candidates left for critical points, but they are fractal measure, for example, a measure supported on a fat counter set, this kind of thing. Okay, well now I will talk a bit more about applied results and about the energy distance kernel. So the energy distance kernel is a lot less singular than the Coulomb kernel. It behaves a lot better in simulations, and actually it is even computable in n log n complexity. What we do is a trick that is not unlike the sliced Wasserstein distance. So what you do is, if you want to take the energy distance of 2 point clouds, okay, you can pick a direction of on the sphere. In case this will give you a line, you project your point clouds on your line, and you take the 1D energy distance between your projected point clouds, okay? This gives you this, so E theta, okay? And if you sum the contribution of the sphere on the sphere, you end up with the true energy distance. So what we do to estimate the energy distance in n log n is to pick projections on the sphere, which is picking vectors on the sphere. And we have a very good statistical estimates with an error that is in square root of d over p. So the curse of dimension is not an exponential curse, okay? To estimate in dimension d, you can take p, equals to d, or if you want precision, like d squared, voilà. It's okay. Our contribution was that not only the gradient is computable in n log n, but this convolution actually is computable in n log n if you take points in dimension 1, okay, and moments, so value of your measure at this point in dimension 1 also. This quantity is computable in n complexity and n log n if your data is not sorted, okay? Well, the n log n is just you sort it, you compute, and you unsort it with the inverse permutation.
Okay, and just to be super explicit, when people do slice Wasserstein, it's not the Wasserstein distance,
Yes.
but here it's just a sliced algorithm to
Yes.
compute the real energy distance.
Yes, that's a big difference. Yes, the slice Wasserstein distance is not equal to the Wasserstein distance. Yes, and it has a very bad behavior in applications even. Whereas here it's the same, and its behavior is really quite good. It's a shame that we don't have many theoretical results by the energy distance for now.
So it's really interesting, because when you do slice Wasserstein, you see Radon transform artifacts, etc. Whereas energy distance, it looks good, like you don't have strained artifacts. So it's remarkable that you can use this trick without the drawbacks.
Yeah, actually, I'm a really big advocate of this the energy distance kernel in applications, and even of its sliced version. It's a very good discrepancy, which is computable very easily. And so being able to compute the whole convolution means that not only the gradient is computable, but also your function. This allows to use different gradient algorithm. Here, what we did was match two Gaussian mixture, just this, using a Polyak step size, and the same Polyak that previously. It's just a small trick, not really important, but using this step size is very good in a lot of gradient descent algorithm. It works quite well if you know the minimal value of your objective function. Here in blue, we have a gradient flow using the true energy distance, okay, so in dimension 10. And here in orange, we have a gradient flow using its sliced version with only p equals 10 projections, okay? The green and red line here are just, so we picked a sample from a Gaussian mixture, and the green and red line represent other sample from the same distribution. So actually, once you're below here, you are overfitting, just what it means. Okay, now on to a more exciting application of being able to compute your convolution. Is we were able to actually provide a good deformation matching algorithm with the energy distance kernel. So we place ourselves in the computational anatomy framework. Okay, so what we want to do is generate homeomorphisms through velocity fields Vt that belongs in RKHS. Okay. So typically the computational cost is in n squared. That's what you have to pay to simulate the interaction of all your particle with all your particle. Okay, you have to estimate all the k xi xj. Okay. Our contribution was to show that we can compute an approximation, a sliced approximation of the interaction in n log n with the energy distance kernel, okay, which is not possible for other kernels such as the Gaussian one. It's very specific to the form of our kernel, okay. However, there are many theoretical issues. Mainly, the energy distance kernel is not regular. It's only Lipschitz, contrary to the Gaussian kernel. Okay, so you don't get C1 velocity fields, which gives you diffeomorphism. So we don't have this. And the energy distance kernel is not positive definite, it's only conditionally positive definite. So conditionally definite positive means that it is definite positive on zero mass measures. Okay. However, there is a trick to modify your kernel to make it positive definite for all measures. We have a representer theorem for conditionally positive definite kernels, okay, which allow you to use exactly the same framework as well, with a few modifications, but the same framework than in RKHS theory. And here we have an example of what you get when you interpolate with your energy distance kernel instead of a Gaussian kernel. So the Gaussian kernel is very local, okay? What you do is you build a bump which approximates your value, the value of your function, and you try to make other bump not interact too much, but you know it's really non-local. What we see here, for example, is that this zone has no red arrow, and the velocity field is close to zero. Okay, and this zone also. Whereas here we have exactly the same red arrows, but it's just a personal judgment. But I think that this kind of interpolations seems a bit better. Like for example, this zone also, where you have arrow going this way and this one this way. Here you have an empty space, which is not really.
It's C1 on the left and it's on the
No, on the left is interpolation with the Gaussian kernel.
Yeah.
Yes.
last slide. You told us that it was not C1 but order.
Well,
Last slide.
yes.
Theoretical issue, non-regular velocity field, order, not C1.
Yes, we managed to get typically Holder or Lipschitz field, but
Okay, but in general, the vector field on the right is not C1.
no, it's not C1 in general.
Okay.
And
So
you can,
here it's better, but
yeah, it has less regularity. So less regularity is an issue, but it can also mean that your system is more expressive. So you know you have to.
Characterize when you have just a sum of Diracs.
Yeah, well, the energy distance kernel is the Euclidean distance. So if you have one Dirac and you take your convolution with the energy distance kernel, you have exactly Lipschitz field as Lipschitz as your Euclidean distance. Okay, that's what it means.
So
Yes.
in 1D, it's really a big like piecewise affine.
Yes, and that's exactly what we get when you interpolate in 1D. You have your function and you just affine an interpolation. That's what happens. Yes. However, well, for more regular measure, we can get C1 velocity fields, but we can only get them for measures that have a Sobolev regularity superior to minus d over 2, which is exactly Dirac or less regular than this. But any measure that is more regular than a Dirac gives you C1 velocity fields. However, of course, in computer, you can simulate continuous measures. Okay. So on a theoretical standpoint, we managed to prove the existence of minimizers in path straightening formulations. Okay. So we work directly on the measures. Okay. Phi t, gamma t. So gamma t is a measure curve. Okay. That will be a parameter for our velocity fields Vt, which are defined as the convolution through the energy distance kernel of your measure gamma t. Okay. Your flow here, psi gamma, is defined as the flow generated by this velocity field. Okay, here you have a matching functional. Okay, you can take. So we wrote this on general measures for now. So for L, you can take, for example, the Wasserstein distance. Okay, or even because we used it, your energy distance functional. Okay. Okay, so here is the matching part, and here is your regularization part. Okay. We had to add a total variation control, and I think it's really a bit harder to prove things without this. Okay, because if you have your total variation regularizations, what you get is B-Lipschitz homeomorphisms. Okay, you don't need this to prove that the velocity field is Lipschitz, but what you need is that the Lipschitz constant. If you integrate your Lipschitz constant from 0 to 1, that it is finite, and the way to do this is to add a total variation here. Well, okay. However, these pi-straightening formulations suffer from the fact that you do not get an exact matching at the end, okay? And you have to put a parameter epsilon in front of your regularization, see what happens when you take epsilon to 0, okay? So a better approach in order to do real matching is to use Hamiltonian equations in order to do some shooting, okay? So there are two ways to see it, which are actually equivalent, okay? So as we said, the energy distance kernel is positive definite on zero-sum vectors, on zero-sum measures, okay? So what you do is you take a projection matrix on that projects on zero-sum vectors, okay? And you take this Hamiltonian here. You take this Hamiltonian here, then you follow your classical Hamilton trajectories, okay? These ones. Another way to do this is to use modified kernels as represented, okay? The kernel K omega is positive definite, okay? And we build just this Hamiltonian. Okay, so I didn't precise it, but when I write K of Q is the kernel matrix, okay? So K, Qi, Qj, okay?
So here, K omega is the projection times K times the projection, or
Well,
K omega in the bottom, it's the same as pi, K, pi at the top, or?
Yes, well, actually, so it's still a work in progress, but yes, to a modified kernel K omega correspond a specific projection matrix. So a condition for this to hold is that, just, okay, here. So we make a modification of our energy distance kernel minus x, minus the Euclidean distance x minus y, okay? We add these two terms, which are not interaction terms, okay? If you sum over x and y, you have a simple sum and not a double sum, okay? Here you could pick, any omega in RD, okay, it's a small typo. You could pick any omega in RD, but in order for the two approaches to be equivalent, you have to take your omega to be one of the Qi points, okay? But actually, yes, they are equivalent to one. Well, you take your favorite projections on zero-sum vectors, okay? And it can be expressed in terms of modified kernels, okay? In order for simulations and code to be more consistent, we preferred this approach here, okay? So the part that can be computed easily through slicing is this vector, so k times p, okay? And this is the n log n computation. Okay, so it's not a quadratic algorithm, once again. And okay, so we illustrate a few, well, why I think the energy distance kernel is relevant and can be used. Well, application can be improved a lot. So here, well, it's a homemade code, so really not perfect, okay? But here I try to solve a matching problem that is maybe a bit hard for a Gaussian kernel. So, the shapes I used. The shapes I used are just so two circles like this, and then you have you have two star shape here. Okay, so you have to model a translation, okay, and your details after, okay, to shrink your circle into a star. Well, the first row is the simulation with a Gaussian kernel, which cannot solve this problem. Below is a better approach with a multi-Gaussian kernel, which is a bit better, but really not much. And here is just matching with the energy distance kernel, which has really no scale parameter, okay? For Gaussian kernel, you have to adapt your scale at every image, every problem, okay? With the energy distance kernel, there is no scale.
But here you picked a very large scale for the first one.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Like that's
Sigma 3.2. So Sigma 3.2 is basically, yes, the size.
Yes, well,
the height of the ellipse?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very fair compared.
yes, but because we are in this situation,
Where the axes are moving, so.
yeah, they are moving.
Yeah.
to read.
Yes, but yeah, it's from 3
Yes.
to 9. Yeah.
Yes, here you are at 4.5 and here too. This is really
So yeah, but that's the translation problem.
Yes.
It's rigid registration. So you're
Yes.
just saying, I need a rigid registration, so I'm using a large kernel so I cannot fit the details. That's something you can.
Yeah, but it's just things you have to think about with the Gaussian kernel, which you do not have to think about with the energy distance kernel. It's really this situation, but yeah, it's a good remark. Yeah, of course, well, using a translation before would improve these results by a lot, but the goal was to show a bit of the shortcomings. Okay. So with more computational images, even here with a few points, when we have matching using our Hamiltonian formulation, the first row is using the true energy distance kernel, okay? And then we have its sliced versions, okay? So we act on the number of projections on the sphere that we use. So the second row is p equals 2, so 2 projection is not enough, but still we have a good matching. Here p equals 25, here p equals 100. So we can really see the differences here. But on the trajectory, we can. So here is the matching with the energy distance kernel, okay? Here with the sliced version, p equals 2. So we have a good matching, but a lot of irregularities still. Okay, so p equals 2 is not enough. P equals 25 is better, okay? And here p equals 100 is almost the same as this. And we can see that as you increase or diminish p, the trajectory seems to be quite consistent. Okay, and you have to keep in mind that the direction are randomly picked. Okay.
Okay, but to be clear, probably you should use the uniform sampling or maybe a slight modification of a uniform sampling.
Yeah, maybe, but it's a bit easier to act on the number of projection you take, just picking a random distribution on the sphere. And well, yeah, good remark, but yeah, of course, the distribution of the directions you take on the sphere may have an effect. Okay. But here they are just picked at random from lab. Okay. And now for the energy distance matching seems to be quite good, but what is really important is its scalability. So here is the same algorithm with 3D shapes. So I know we can't see anything here, but it's still a work in progress. Huh? And you have to trust me, the loss is diminishing. So we go from 1.3 to 5 times 10 to the power -3, okay? And here we can see, well, it's not perfect, okay? You have a part of the feed that does strange things, but it is not a problem of the method, it's a problem of how the volumes are sampled here, okay? Because we use as a loss, not a landmark loss, but just, once again, an energy distance loss, okay? And it's this kind of matching with a lot of points. Here already, well, 50,000 is a lot on a home computer, but it's able to run in a few seconds, 1 or 2 minutes, quite easily. And here we use twice. We use that two times our sliced energy distance. We use the sliced version of the Hamiltonian, and additionally, our loss between the deformated shapes and our objective is the sliced energy distance. So the two combine quite well.
So we agree that it scales linearly in P.
Yes, linearly in P, yes. So you have two costs when you are doing slicing. Well, you have the n log n cost of doing for one direction your 1D energy distance. So it's linear in P. And another cost that is not to neglect, because actually it's in low dimension, it's the bigger cost. In the same way for the sliced Wasserstein distance. So the cost of projecting your n particles on p direction, your n particle in dimension d on p direction is actually this one. So ndp plus p n log n. And you see that, well, if d is superior to n log n, the projection cost is the bigger one. Okay? So in dimension 2 or 3, this cost will be bigger. However, no, sorry. So in dimension 2 or 3, this cost will be bigger, but in a higher dimension, as we saw in, for example, in images flow, where you are in dimension 1000 easily, this cost is the biggest one. But yes, that's the final cost of your slice energy distance. Okay, and this talk is over, and thank you for listening to me. Yeah. Okay, any questions? Yes?
Can you go back to the slide where you talk about the log Sobolev for, PL inequality?
Okay.
Yeah. So for the entropy, on the left, the term on the left is like the Fisher information.
Yes.
Do you have this some kind of equivalent for the MMD functional, or like is the term of the left, is it something special, or
no,
just a square norm of the grid?
No, really. Well, here the PL inequality we managed to get was very specific to the Coulomb kernel, really, and it's and really we got it from algebraic tricks that the Coulomb kernel cancels the Laplacian, okay. That's why where is it? Okay. That's why our constant is here on the minimum of the density. Okay. If you use other kernels such as the energy distance kernel, this kind of control does not provide a PL inequality. And yeah, it's a specificity of the entropy functional to be able to control it with your
Right.
Fisher information.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd like to ask you, coming back to the same slide, the one with exponential minus lambda.
Yes.
Yeah. So you insist on the fact that, okay, for the Coulomb kernel, you're able to get those results.
Mhm.
But I assume probably you did numerical experiments or things. I'm wondering if this is like tight in terms of convergence, or like in real life, it doesn't actually matter to be
Yeah.
bounded from below, and so actually it works. I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Well, simulation are harder to get with your Coulombian kernel because of the singularity. Okay, but we are convinced with François Xavier that actually this algorithm converge globally for any measures if you take the energy distance kernel. Okay, just you do not have at all the same regularity results, so you cannot use the same kind of theorem. Like, but yeah, that's what has driven me since the beginning of my master thesis. Is that the flow of the energy distance converge globally for any measures, but we think it's a hard problem, and maybe we didn't see any particularly nasty counterexample.
But don't you have something like it's converged almost everywhere, or for negligible subsets, this one will not converge and will be annoying?
Yes, but it's really difficult to express conditions, and we didn't manage to do so even after trying very hard for the energy distance.
Again, so the difference between the Gaussian kernel and the distance kernel, you see very significant difference, not in time, I'm completely convinced, but what you can do with both kernels, do you see limitation on one side or not the other one?
Yeah, actually, just interpolating your function on a finite set of points is just inverting matrix. So, what is more telling is what happens on the points that you do not really want to interpolate your function at. So, yeah, the main difference is this kind of thing I mentioned, like in this zone, it's empty, whereas for the energy distance kernel, you seem to have a flow, just judgment, but I don't know. We have really this kind of difference in what we see. So the Gaussian kernel is a local kernel, and the energy distance is highly non-local.
I don't understand, because if I look at the top left corner, I see black arrows, which give me basically the scale of the Gaussian, which is large.
Which is, yes.
It's quite large. And
Yeah.
so there's compensation effect, but it's not a scale matter of the kernel here. The fact that you have a zero area is because there's compensation, not.
Yes, there is some scale, obviously, yes. Yes, you're right.
Is it not just a lucky shot here? You have a large
Well,
band of
if
compensation, and on the other side, you also have area with compensation.
Yes, but if you take a smaller scale for your Gaussian kernel, what you will get is just spikes interpolating your function, and but yeah. Yeah, you're right. But once again, one of the main advantages of the energy distance kernel is that it has no scale parameter. We think the scale is contained in the expression of the kernel here. And here, this kind of quantity acts as a scale in your algorithm.
But that's a very good news. You can do large translation and you can also manage details.
Yes.
apparently.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that's what we saw. Mhm.
And maybe if I can make an important remark, it's that, so, I've been saying for years that the reason why in our small group Gaussian kernels are popular, it's really historical, but it's really not a good idea. No, it really, I mean, but it's really, I think it comes strictly because our community evolved from people who are doing like 3D MRI. And when you're in the 3D grid, Gaussian kernels are super cheap to compute. So
Yes.
that's really the history of it. But in the outside world, I'll say that most people who do anatomy, they use simplet splines. Like that's overwhelmingly the default kernel. And it's really interesting because many people think that simplet splines means minus r squared log r. But actually, it's not true. And if you read the original simplet splines paper, it's very clear. Actually, simplet splines, it's just like how you define the Coulomb kernel.
Yes.
It's actually defined by an integral operator, which in dimension 2 is minus r squared log r.
Yes.
But in dimension 3, it's exactly energy distance kernel. So I think that's really something which is interesting to dig deeper, is that in your PhD, you really highlighted the fact that the formulas actually vary with the dimension.
Yes.
And energy distance, it kind of corresponds to Coulomb in dimension 1, to simplet splines in dimension 3.
Yes.
And now here you're showing in dimension 2, so for me it's still unclear what it really means to do that, but that's...
Yeah, well, actually, the convolution with the energy distance kernel acts as the inverse of the differential operator. So you take your Laplacian to the power d plus 1 over 2. Okay, so the formula for the energy distance kernel does not vary with dimension, but the corresponding operator is not the same.
And so the omega here, there's like 0 is a good choice. Or...
Yes, zero is a good choice actually. Any points. So what you want to do here is so your energy kernel is positive definite and zero mean measures. Okay, so you see you have to project your measure, except when you project you lose. So you project on space with codimension 1. Okay, just zero mean measure. And when you project, you lose one direction, okay, which you retrieve through your omega. If you want, for example, there are other conditionally positive definite kernels where the linear constraints have a higher dimension than just zero-sum things. Okay, for example, for other differential operator, actually you have to be a root of a system of polynomials. Okay, and for some other kernel you have to take several points. Okay, but here your omega can be anything you want. Okay. And actually, in application, in order to be able to express our things on our projections on measures, okay, and not isolate a particular point to be special. What we do is we take our measure gamma. Well, if you have points, x1, xn, what we do is you take your measure gamma, and you take gamma minus, the total mass of gamma times the Dirac masses corresponding to the xi. So that's a projection that is possible. Here, the projection that is linked to this to one omega anchor point is this projection here. So to gamma, you associate gamma minus the mass of gamma times the Dirac in omega. Okay, and just it's a matter of what you prefer, what you want to do. Okay.
And to be clear, what practical impacts does the choice of gamma have? Like, for instance, in this figure, if you move gamma from
Yes.
one side of the screen to another, does it change really things, or
Well,
actually it cancels out and it doesn't
mhm.
make a difference?
Well, so
With the scale parameter.
Omega. Yeah.
yes, omega. So yes, so adding your omega here adds another bump. You know, if you have your sum of Lipschitz function taking a gamma that is not in your control points adds an artificial bump that is that is by your representer theorem not optimal. So the choice is to take, if you work on a set of points x1, xn, what you should do is take a gamma to be one of the xi, or use a sum like this. But actually, it has to be clarified. But really, the choice of gamma has no influence on what you get in the end if you choose gamma to be one of the xi. Okay.
Okay. So you mean that for those interpolation plots, if you pick as omega one of the xi's, because you're not adding a new bumps,
Mhm.
you will get the exact same result?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
Okay.
It does not depend on omega. Yeah,
Yeah. In the end, the interpolation you get does not depend on
okay, so choosing omega is like choosing an origin or like something.
like an anchor point. As we saw, like it's just as if you have to evaluate a function, okay? Except well, you project your function of a function with a zero integral, okay? And omega will be like the value of f at omega. It's like just a way to keep your the dimension you sorted. But
Okay. And when you say it doesn't change, it's like really it does not change mathematically, or it's just empirically it doesn't matter?
well, empirically it doesn't change, and mathematically I think also because really it's a different parametrization. Here you can take several different projection matrices, okay, that will correspond to other modified kernels. Okay, and here if you work on coordinates, each coordinate will not have the same role in how the energy is computed at the end. So yeah, it's still a work in progress. This point has to be clarified, but that is what we think.
So at the end of the day, if you want to test your method, I just have to modify my Hamiltonian on working the element stuff.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
So cheap works too.
Yeah, it's really cheap.
Yeah.
Actually, when I develop this kind of examples, my functions are the same. I took a lot of inspiration from Scikit-Shape actually, but to build my own code because I don't have a Mac
So
or a
no
Linux.
offense, there is better picture on Scikit-Shape.
Yeah, of course. This form also is from Scikit-Shape. Maybe you recognize it.
C'est actually déformétrique.
Yes, it's actually different. It's exactly the prehistoric.
C'est Barbara, alors elle est juste formée.
Okay.
It brings emotion, it's good.
Okay. Yeah, it was just to test on a few. There's like 200 points or 100 here. Okay.
I mean, still the difference is that your kernel, it depends on the data, right? Because you have to fix omega, which is one of the xi.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Your kernel depends on the data. That's a big difference with other kernels such as the Gaussian kernel. Yes.
Okay, and okay, so to be clear, in those pictures also, your distribution of points moves, and so omega moves alongside, or actually omega was fixed at the beginning and it doesn't change.
Mhm. What I did was to take my omega as moving.
Okay.
Okay, my omega is moving. Okay. But you could get really the same plots if you take omega equals 0.
Yes.
So not really the same, but matching plots, okay? So I say not the same because 0 is not guaranteed to be in your control points. So you have that thing where you add a bump, okay?
I have a question, but it's you completely can answer that it's too early in your work. Do you have an insight on the momentum regularity, the difference between a Gaussian kernel and an energy distant kernel? Does it affect?
I'm sorry.
Does the choice of the kernel affect the regularity of the initial momenta in
The choice of omega that we take.
the choice, the choice of the energy or this what I still call energy distance and a Gaussian kernel on another kernel, but mainly between ED and Gaussian. Do you think there's difference in terms of regularity of the initial momentum depending on the...
Well, actually, I think a barrier that cannot be broken is that you will not be able to generate better than Lipschitz homomorphism.
Yeah, but in practice, we apply everything to cloud points. Point types. So
yes, so it's the same.
The further there, but the fact that we can generate with one kernel very smooth, big translations and small distance. Just tell me, maybe there's some.
Yeah. Well.
To create very.
Yes.
Irregular momentum.
Yeah, maybe. Well, actually, that's why here we had to take a total variation control, because you see, if you take if you take 2 points. Okay, if you take 2 points, you are able to control. You can make them close together with your total variation rising. Okay, and your Lipschitz constant will be actually will be bounded by your total variation, and I think the control is this control is sharp, but if you allow your total variation to go to infinity, your Lipschitz constant goes to infinity also. Yes. Okay.